of daily learning. Right, folks, we are now live on YouTube and Facebook. I want to welcome you all here this morning for another session of daily learning and lockdown inspiration. As you're logging on, please do share with us your greetings. Thank you for those who have already started to share their greetings. Anyone else that would like to share their greetings, please do so on the chat, either on Facebook or on YouTube. I'd love to hear from you. It is a wonderful day today. Wonderful day today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I see you all logging on. Thank you for sharing. I see on YouTube some comments are coming through on the wrong day's video. So Manfred Kalmek, sorry, Ronnie Kotkus. That is Ronnie Kotkus. You're on the wrong YouTube video. So just log out and go back into the correct video. I see you all logging on. It's wonderful to see you all here. Thank you for all joining. Thank you for being part of this conversation. If you're just joining us now, please say hello. Good. Let's welcome everyone. I'm going to do that now. We'll just welcome everyone who greeted me. I'd like to welcome you personally, as I do normally. Monici Mindel, Arnold Orkin, Helen Feinstein and Brian, David Ginsberg, Michael Stein, Norman Stein, Felicia Jenks, Bernice Krause, Manfred Kalmek, Anne Hack, Shalom Triga. Beautiful. That's on Facebook. On YouTube, we have Moira Dworkin, Raylene Brask, Vega Sega, and Stan Brask, Janice Leibovitz, and Stephen Herr, who requests that we learn in memory of his mother, Esther Bat Moshe. We'll do that. Good morning, Wayne Miller and Simeon Angel. Thank you. Great. It's good to see you all here this morning. Fantastic. And I got a wonderful, wonderful message, which I'll share with you. Ian Clemenson, good morning. Shelley Smith, good morning. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for being part of today's session of daily learning and lockdown inspiration. It's wonderful to see so many of you coming back every morning. Thank you for joining us again. I got a wonderful message on Facebook yesterday, which some of the participants may appreciate. I'll try and fit. So while you're all logging on, we're going to take another minute or so before we begin. And just to tell you how small the world is. So here, listen to this. Our listeners and viewers of today, Wednesday, 3rd of June. Michael Beck, good morning. Good to see you here, Michael. All the way from Linksfield. Great. So listen to this message I got yesterday on Facebook. Shalom Rabbi. I listened to your shir on Mayim Achronim. Some of you may recall that shir that we spoke about washing of the hands following the meal in comparison to washing of the hands before the meal. You may recall that series of discussions that we had with regards to the meal itself, the Shabbos meal, the Friday night meal. Hi to Jaime and Linda Drew. So the message I got yesterday on Facebook reads, Shalom Rabbi, I listened to your shir on Mayim Achronim, very interesting. I was bar mitzvahed and married at Sydenham Shul, and my dad was a foundation member. Rabbi Goldman officiated at his funeral. I go to Chabad of Dallas, Rabbi Mendel Dubrovsky at Chabad of Dallas. It was wonderful hearing a Chabadnik at my old shul with so many followers, Yasher Koyach, Selwyn Josset. So if you know who Selwyn Josset is, Someone listened to our share to our share of my Machredim on Facebook. Some of you may remember Selwyn, so let us know in the comments if you do, because that's the message that Selwyn shared with us from Dallas, Texas yesterday, from one of our broadcast shiurim. So thank you for the motivation that you all give me every morning to be part of this, to join along, because to have every day, we got over close to 30 students here this morning, 32 students here this morning between Facebook and YouTube. It's very motivational, and these teachings are actually assisting who knows how many Jews locally and overseas. So thank you all for that. Oh, Daryl and Shelley Smith. I think it's Daryl Smith who writes here that Selwyn Josset grew up next door to me. That's interesting. Small world. Ronnie Kotkas, thank you. You're on the right class today. Neil Herman, good to see you here. Thank you for your greetings. So we got close to 35 students here this morning. Wonderful. Thank God. Thank you for being here. So today's topic relates to the parasha of this week. Some of you were part of a Gemara class of recent, which spoke about the wayward woman, the wife who is a sota and suspected of being immoral to her own husband. I'm not going to get today into the discussion of, are we suspecting the woman? Are we suspecting the husband? That's not the topic I want to go into, but just to touch upon the story of the sota and where there's relevance to us. And before I do that, I want you please to share this on Facebook with your participants. Okay, please do share. I've just realized that my camera battery is about to die. So just bear with me for a moment while I disappear and I get the battery pack to recharge the camera before it dies. Apologies. Apologies. Great. So who do we have here today? I see since we've joined, Hilly Lipworth, thank you. Jenny Lichtenstein, thank you. Marlene Scher, Robert Levy. And good to see that Wayne and Neil are here together, learning together. So it's fantastic. Fantastic, guys. Okay, so we're talking about the wayward woman, the sota, who is suspected of being immoral to her husband. But what I wanted to focus on was the punishment process. Because we know what happened with the woman. She had to be tested using the water of the kior, of the wash basin, is the way that we were able to discern whether this woman, the sota, was either guilty or innocent. Now, the Torah teaches us a fundamental principle here. And the fundamental principle is measure for measure. Midah keneged midah. Measure for measure. And what I mean is that every step of the way of the process, the way we test this woman, the sota, of whether she's guilty or innocent, was measure for measure for the act that she transgressed or was suspected of transgressing. Okay, so let me give some examples of that. For example, the korban that she brought, the sacrifice that she brought, was a barley sacrifice. And as I said, some of you actually studied the tractate of Sota, so you'll remember these details. The sacrifice that the Sota brings is one of barley. And the reason for that is because barley is considered by the Torah to be animal food. So because she acted, or she suspected of acting in an animalistic sexual manner, therefore she brings animal food. That's one example. Or another example is that she is suspected of pouring her lover wine in beautiful glasses, expensive glasses. So therefore we pour her the water that she drinks, the water that's used as magic potion to test whether she's innocent or guilty, is poured to her in earthenware cups. Because you use expensive cups to sin, we're therefore going to give you earthenware cups to drink from. So that's the method of testing her innocence or her guilt. But the message that I want to take away, or I want to ask, is with regards to this policy of measure for measure, midah keneged midah, is generally the way the Torah takes. Generally, the Torah takes the approach of midah keneged midah. And so let's try to see where else we find punishments in the Torah that either mirror this policy and this method or don't. Good morning, Arlene Yudolovitz. Where in Torah do we find stories that either follow the pathway, follow the method, the strategy of midah keneged midah, or are perhaps not as consistent with that policy? Measure for measure. So take, for example, the spies in the desert, the Meraglim, the spies. And we know what happened. They went in to Israel. They came back with negative news, bad news about the country. They convinced the nation that they can't go in. No one can go in. It's too dangerous. They're too big. They're giants. They're going to eat us and annihilate us. And they convinced the nation that we're not going in. So what happens to them? They are then punished with 40 years in the desert. 40 years in the desert. Why 40 years? Is that a thumbsuck of a number? How did God get to 40 years? Why 40 years in the desert? So the Torah tells us that the country of Israel should have taken them 40 days, or they did. They took 40 days in the country to explore the country. 40 days. And because they use those 40 days negatively, they therefore are punished with 40 years of not going into the country. Besides Joshua and Kalev, Yeshua and Kalev, who were two of the spies, good morning Hilton Sawitsky, who were two of the spies, they obviously were not punished, and therefore Joshua and Kalev actually went into Israel together with the nation after 40 years in the desert. So I ask you that question, is that considered measure for measure? Is the 40 years in the desert considered measure for measure in comparison to the 40 days that the Meraglim, that the spies took to walk around Israel? Do you think it's fair? I'd love to hear your feedback. It's been a while since we've had a bit of an interaction here on our different platforms. So I'd like you to share what your thoughts are. As a parent, as a grandparent, as an educator, is that considered measure for measure? In other words, are you allowed to increase the size of the punishment based on your discretion, even while trying to mirror and to follow the method of measure for measure? That would be the debate in terms of civil law, in terms of civil punishment. On the one hand, you want the punishment to mirror the act. You want the punishment to be in sync with the transgression, because through the punishment, the individual will learn how to correct themselves and how to improve, on the one hand. On the other hand, you as the educator, you as the judge, you as the disciplinarian, you've got the discretion to increase that punishment as you see fit. I see Jonathan has responded. Jonathan from Israel is joining us here. And if anyone else is joining us from overseas, from Israel or Australia or anywhere else, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Or anyone who watches this later, like Selwyn Jossett, who commented to me on Facebook much later. I'd love to hear from you. So please do give us your feedback either now live or later. So Jonathan writes on Facebook, "Hi Rob, did the punishment fit the crime of what our ancestors committed?" Exactly, that's the question. Jonathan, to answer your question, did the punishment fit the crime? I think it did. Because they spoke negatively about the country. Hi, Dennis. They spoke negatively about the country. So it makes sense that the punishment should be fine. If you cried, you're not going to go in again. If you cried about the country and you're scared about the country, you don't deserve to go in. So to answer Jonathan's question, I think the punishment, in a way, was measure for measure. It was mirroring the act. In fact, we know that the sin of the spies took place on Tisha B'Av, right? And this is Tisha B'Av before any of our fast days were introduced. It's Tisha B'Av before the destruction of the temples, right? And God says to us, well, you're crying on Tisha B'Av. I'm going to make this day a day of crying for you. And so as a result of your sin of making the nation cry, you're going to have the day of Tisha B'Av to cry throughout history. And it started then. And it was followed by the destruction of the temples too. So I think the punishment, in a way, was mirroring and in sync with the transgression of our forefathers. But the question I have for you is, 1 day to 1 year, what's your approach to that? What do you think? Remember, 40 days it took the spies to travel around Israel, and 40 years we were punished to stay in the desert. It's 1 year per day. So it's like telling a student, you were late 5 minutes for class, you're therefore going to stay behind a half an hour after school. Right? 6 times the amount. Is that fair? Is that measure for measure? I'd like to hear your view. My take is that it is measure for measure, because measure for measure doesn't necessarily mean that the consequence has to be tit for tat. Just because you were late 5 minutes to class, therefore you stay 5 minutes. It's not a catch-up consequence. It is a disciplinary. It is a punishment. The punishment is there to teach you lekach, to teach you a lesson. And so I think it's fair, if I may say so, and if any of you want to contribute to the conversation, I think when we talk about measure for measure, we have to understand that measure for measure doesn't mean exactly the same. Because if it's exactly the same, that's not really punishment. Take, for example, a school that was battling with windows. Children were breaking windows in school. I don't mean the way we're seeing the pictures on the news from New York City or California with the riots that are taking place now in a terrible time in the States. I don't mean that. What I mean to say is children that were continuously breaking the windows through sport or through havoc in the classroom. Present company obviously excluded. None of you ever broke windows at home or in school. But we're talking about a generation that would break windows. And the school had to cut down and somehow discipline the students not to break these windows. So it doesn't help to tell them that whoever breaks the window will pay for the window. I mean, that's obvious, isn't it? It's obvious if you break something, you pay for it. The punishment that we're talking about, measure for measure, is that maybe you'll clean all the windows around the school. You know, if you break a window and we're trying to cut down on breaking of the window, paying for a window may not be enough. Paying for a window is a direct consequence. It's not necessarily a punishment. If you break something, you pay for it. The punishment is if you break the window, you're going to clean the windows. We're going to show you how important windows are for the classroom. So to get back to my question, or get back to my answer, to understand what measure for measure means, it means it doesn't have to be exactly the same. The spies traveled 40 days through the desert. Their punishment didn't have to be 40 days. God was able to give them 40 years and still stay within the method of measure for measure. Thank you, Arnold Orkin. They prevented 3 million people from entering. Exactly. They prevented 3 million people from entering. True that. If you're just joining us on our daily learning program of Lockdown Inspiration, please do share with us. Robert Levy, I see you're on Facebook and YouTube. Okay. Nonetheless, good to see you all. If anyone here is from overseas, Israel, Australia, let us know. We'd love to hear from you as well. If you have any questions or comments on this topic of measure for measure punishment that we're taking from this week's Torah portion of the story of the Sota, please do put it into the comments because we love to engage with you directly. I see here, Facebook not working. Okay. I see Stephen here says, do the crime, do the time. Exactly. But the question is how to measure the time, Stephen. How do you measure the punishment? How do you ensure that the punishment is measure for measure? So I gave you an example, 40 days, 40 years of the spies in the desert. And I think that still stays within the method of measure for measure. Let's take another story, which is quite a fascinating one. And that's the story of Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert. Moshe Rabbeinu, it actually relates to the story of the sin, of the spies. Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert, we know that he too was punished, right? Let's just go back to that story. Moshe Rabbeinu was told to speak to them and extract water from the rock. And we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was punished because he didn't speak to the rock, rather he hit the rock. And because he hit the rock, he therefore was punished. He was punished quite severely. And many people who come across this story in the Torah have the question and ask the question, why is he punished so severely? Because he didn't speak to the rock, but rather he hit the rock. Therefore, he was punished and he was told that he can't go into Israel. That's a very, very severe act. So before I get to that, I just want to thank Stanley Brask here, because Stanley Brask just sent a picture. That's hilarious, Stanley. I just got your picture of you and Selwyn Jossett in Johannesburg last year. You were at school together. It's a small world, Stan. So you can message Selwyn and tell him that we're both learning together. Torah together. I see Brian Olwen can't get onto YouTube today. Brian, what's the problem? Not sure. Try again, Brian. Okay, good. So let's get on to Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert. Many people have problems with that story. Moshe Rabbeinu, was that measure for measure? It's not fair. This is someone who was like the biggest Zionist. He was waiting to go into Israel. He had dreams of taking the people into Israel. And what happened to Moshe? An absolute disaster. He was told to stay behind. He was told to stay behind. He was going to be in Egypt. Terrible, terrible story. Very sad. And how do we explain that? So many people want to say that, tzaddikim and righteous people are judged more severely than average people. Moshe Rabbeinu being a tzaddik, and Moshe Rabbeinu, who he was, is judged much more stricter than others. True. That's okay. We can accept that Moshe would be judged more strict. But where do we see measure for measure? He hit the rock, therefore he stays back in Egypt. How does that work? So there's a beautiful, beautiful insight. If I'm not mistaken, the Rebbe gives this insight. It's a powerful message. And that is that it is measure for measure. Moshe was used to dealing with a nation that needed strict discipline. When he took them out of Egypt, we know what the Torah says about us, about the Jewish people. Am Kishei Oref, they are a stiff-necked nation. We were a difficult bunch, difficult nation. Welcome to Lionel Rubin. We were a difficult bunch, hard nation to work with. And Moshe had to often discipline us. Punishment, a plague here and death there, whether it's related to the Egel Hazov, the golden calf, or whether it was related to Zimri and Cosby, the sin that took place with Pinchas, who had to kill them both during the immoral sin. Moshe Rabbeinu had to deal with us in a very, very strict manner. We weren't the well-behaved class in school. And so Moshe had to discipline us. And that was the method of Moshe. But as we went through the desert for 40 years, and as we traveled, we started to soften up a little bit. The Jewish people became more soft, more amenable, more accepting of God's word, of Moshe Rabbeinu's word. to the point that it was now getting towards the end of our 40 years. We were now getting ready to go into Egypt, into Israel, and suddenly we were changing. And because we were changing as a nation, we were changing as students, we were becoming more observant in a way of God's word, of Moshe Rabbeinu's word. The method of education had to change as well. And we see that in the instruction to Moshe. Moshe was told at the beginning of the journey of the Jewish people in Egypt, in the desert, Moshe was told to hit the rock the first time round, to hit the rock and extract water. That was the instruction given to Moshe. 40 years later, Moshe is now being told to speak to the rock. Hey, interesting. First time round, 40 years ago, Moshe is told to hit the rock. Now Moshe is told to speak to the rock. What changed? What changed was the method of education. That's what changed. Hitting the rock or speaking to the rock was a reflection of the way Moshe Rabbeinu had to deal and work with the people, with Am Yisrael. 40 years ago, you had to hit them. 40 years ago, you had to hit the rock because they were a stiff-necked nation. The only way to deal with them was going to be through discipline, through harsh, strong discipline. That's the only way it was going to work. And so hit the rock was the instruction that was told to Moshe right at the beginning of the journey of the Jews in the desert. But now Moshe is told to speak to the rock. You know why? Because the method of education is now changing. Hitting doesn't work anymore. You know, the cane. I wonder if some of you had the cane in school. By the way, it's not such an old thing. Although in most countries it stopped a long, long time ago. I grew up as a teenager in Israel. When I was 13, 14 years old, I had a ruler and a stick. It wasn't a cane, but it was a stick and a ruler that was hit on my fingers. Believe it or not, I'm talking about the 90s, as a student in the 90s. So not too long ago, in Israel, they were still using the cane and still using the ruler. But even today, that doesn't work anymore. Hitting a student doesn't work. I mean, we see what's going on in America right now with these riots. Okay, obviously it's tragic that a civilian lost his life by the hands of the police force. But it is tragic. But how do you discipline people? So often sticks and stones, canes and rulers, it doesn't work. Moshe's told at the end of the 40 years, it doesn't work anymore. You got to talk to the rock. Talk to the people. If you talk to the people, they'll understand you. They'll get you. They've softened up. They're now kalim, they're vessels to be able to absorb the word of God, to be able to absorb the words of Moshe. And Moshe got it wrong. Moshe couldn't speak to the rock. It didn't work. It says he spoke to the wrong rock, but it didn't work. So he came back to the stick. That was the method of education that he knew. He came back to the stick and he hit the rock. And here the Torah tells us that he was punished. And he was punished to stay back in Egypt. Why? In the desert. Why? It is measure for measure. And listen to this. It's measure for measure because Moshe Rabbeinu was told at that point, we're not punishing you. God's not punishing you. God is basically saying to Moshe that your method of education, your method of chinuch, of how you discipline the people up until this point is no longer relevant for these people. These people are now going into a country. They're going into Egypt. They're going to Israel. They're going to build their own civilization. They're going to build their own society. Hitting and smacking doesn't work anymore. That method of discipline doesn't work anymore. We've seen it. 40 years in the desert. We now know the Jewish people are not ready for that. They're ready for talking. Talk to them. Words can convince them. Just use love. You can use discipline, but through words, because words, the mouth, is the best way of disciplining adults or mature individuals. And Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't do that. And so his act led to the punishment. But the punishment wasn't insignificant. The punishment wasn't random, that because you hit the rock, therefore you stay in the desert. The punishment was a direct consequence. It continues the theme that we started today with. We started today with measure for measure, based on the story of the Sota in this week's parasha, the consequence has to mirror the act. The consequence has to be in sync with the transgression. So it was with Moshe. Moshe was told that your method of education is no longer relevant. Your method of education can't continue. This people need talking to. They need warm words as a nation going into Israel. I want to welcome all our participants who are with us live on Facebook and YouTube. We have over 37, close to 40 participants here across the two platforms. It's been wonderful having you all here. If you have just joined us, please put a comment in the comments bar, either on YouTube or on Facebook. I'd love to hear that you're here with us. I'd love to interact with you. Even if you're going to watch this later, just like Selwyn Jossett from Texas, Dallas, Texas, let me know later that he was watching this fantastic, our daily session. I want you to let me know too, either live or afterwards. You can send me a message on Facebook or any other platform. I'll be happy to engage with you. It's been fantastic being with you. We've been discussing today, if you're still on, just share this. Those of you on Facebook can like the video or share the video. On YouTube, it's a bit more technical, a bit more difficult, but nonetheless, it's been wonderful having you all here. And as we wrap up the program, just to apply this practically, measure for measure, because when the punishment mirrors the act, it teaches us how to correct ourselves. It teaches us how to improve. We gave examples of the Sotah in this week's parasha, where we see the Torah deal with her in such a manner. We also take the lesson. We also spoke about the spies in the desert and the way that God punished them for 40 years after 40 days of traveling through the country and telling the people negative feedback. And we spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu in the desert and why he was punished in such a severe punishment. And the answer is, it wasn't a punishment, it was a consequence. Moshe Rabbeinu's consequence was a direct link to his act. He hit the rock rather than speaking to the rock. God said, you've shown that you're not. The method of education has changed. It's now time for Yeshua to take the Jewish people into the land of Israel. And the same thing can be said regarding ourselves. Our sages tell us that what's going to be in store for us in Olam Haba, what lies for us in Olam Haba, in the world to come, what we're going to benefit from, what we're going to gain in the world to come, the punishment or the reward, right, that the soul is going to go through. It's not going to be random. The punishment that God's going to give for us is not going to be random. It's going to be a direct link of our actions. As Hashem doesn't randomly punish a person, but rather the process that we go through, the process that the neshama goes through afterlife, in the life after life, and the process of reward that we're going to benefit from in the world to come in Olam Haba is directly linked to our performance in this world. Ma'aseinu va'avodatenu, we're taught. Our actions is actually forging the way for us in the world to come. Thank you, Raylene. Wow, that's great. Raylene posts on YouTube any session we've ever missed. We always catch it up later in the day or the night. It's very convenient. Geez, thank you so much for that, Raylene. I really appreciate that feedback. And just to let you know that the videos are available after we conclude the half-an-hour session. They're available on YouTube or Facebook, wherever you choose to tune in throughout the day or the weeks. So thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. Anyone else can do the same. I know some of you have already told me that you do catch up the videos at a later point in time. But Felicia, thanks for your regards and thanks for your good wishes. It's been wonderful having you all with us live on YouTube and Facebook for another session of daily learning. We'll be back here tomorrow morning, 10:30 on YouTube or Facebook. If you have any questions you'd like to share with us, please do share them, either publicly on the group, on the session, or privately to me, and I'd be very, very happy to engage, or possibly even to bring it as a topic to one of our daily learning sessions. In the meantime, have a wonderful day ahead. Keep safe, keep sane, and keep spiritual.